I never thought my own son would betray me while I lay in a hospital bed, but life has a way of revealing people's true nature when you're at your most vulnerable. The sedatives were still coursing through my veins as Ethan guided my trembling hand across those papers. "It's just routine paperwork for your recovery care, Mom," he assured me with that smile that had once comforted me through decades of life's hardships. Now, that same smile concealed the greatest betrayal I would ever experience. "I'm Constance Blackwell, Dr. Constance Blackwell, as I've been known for 45 years in Savannah's medical community. At 72, I've performed over 3,000 open-heart surgeries, saved countless lives, and built one of the most respected cardiothoracic practices in the Southeast. But none of that prepared me for what happened after my own heart valve replacement surgery last month. The monitors beeped steadily beside my bed as I fought through the fog of post-operative medication. Something felt wrong about those documents. Too many pages, too much fine print for standard hospital forms. I'd spent my career reading between the lines, making life-or-death decisions based on subtle indicators. Even in my sedated state, those instincts hadn't abandoned me. 3 days earlier, my hands, the hands that had delicately repaired damaged hearts for decades, had been shaking as the nurse prepped me for surgery. Not from fear, but from the progressive nerve damage that had forced my retirement 6 months ago. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. The surgeon who could no longer perform surgery now needed surgery herself. "You're in good hands with Dr. Patterson," Nurse Imani had assured me as she adjusted my IV, "though everyone says he's not quite as skilled as you were." She winked, trying to lighten the moment. What Imani didn't know was that my son Ethan and son-in-law Wesley had been pressuring me for weeks to sign over my private practice and investment accounts into a family trust they'd established. For protection, they claimed. For tax purposes, they insisted. But something in Ethan's eyes, a flicker of something I hadn't seen since he was a teenager caught in a lie, had made me hesitate. Now, lying in my hospital bed with tubes and wires connecting me to machines, that hesitation crystallized into certainty as I watched Ethan slide paper after paper beneath my fingertips. "Initial here, Mom. And here. It's all standard procedure," he murmured, his voice soothing but rushed. Behind him, Wesley stood near the door, checking his watch repeatedly, his normally composed face tight with impatience. With decades of medical practice, I'd learned to appear more sedated than I actually was when necessary, a skill developed during countless tense moments in the operating room when patients unexpectedly regained consciousness. I let my eyes droop and my hand go slack occasionally, buying precious seconds to scan portions of the documents. The words transfer of ownership, relinquishment of control, and irrevocable jumped out at me through the pharmaceutical haze. This was no hospital paperwork. This was the very trust agreement I'd refused to sign before my surgery, now being slipped to me while they thought my defenses were down. That morning, before they arrived, I'd done something that would save me, though I didn't fully realize it at the time. My old handheld voice recorder, a relic from my days of dictating surgical notes, lay hidden in my toiletries bag beside the bed. As a creature of habit, I'd packed it without thinking. But when I overheard a nurse mentioning to a colleague that my son had called asking about my medication schedule, a cold unease settled in my chest. I'd pressed record and slipped the device under my pillow just before visiting hours. "Almost done, Mom," Ethan said, turning to page 6. "Just a few more signatures and you can rest." I forced myself to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. "What exactly am I signing?" Ethan's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened, just slightly, just enough. "Just administrative forms the hospital requires, Mom. Nothing to worry about. The longer you take, the longer they'll keep you here." I let my eyes flutter closed, appearing to drift off momentarily. When I opened them again, I saw Wesley step forward and whisper something in Ethan's ear. My son nodded impatiently. "Mom, please focus. We need to get through these before the nurse comes back for your next round of medication." The urgency in his voice confirmed my suspicions. They needed this done before my mind cleared, before I could read what I was signing. With deliberate slowness, I signed my name, but with my left hand, not my right. a scrawl so illegible and uncharacteristic of my usual signature that any competent legal examination would immediately flag it as suspicious. A small act of rebellion, a breadcrumb for my future self to follow. "There we go," Ethan said, gathering the papers quickly. "All taken care of." The relief in his voice was palpable as he slid the documents into his leather portfolio. "You rest now. Meredith sends her love from Atlanta. She wanted to come, but you know how busy she is with that class action case. My daughter, always too busy to visit. I wondered if she knew what her brother and husband were doing. I wondered if she was part of it. When—" I struggled to form the words, playing up my sedation. "When will Dr. Patterson come by?" "He already did his rounds while you were sleeping," Wesley interjected smoothly. "Everything looks good. You'll be back home in no time." Another lie. I'd been awake when the nursing shift changed, and there had been no doctor's rounds yet that morning. They left shortly afterward, Ethan kissing my forehead with what felt like cold lips, promising to return tomorrow. As the door closed behind them, I fumbled for the call button. Nurse Imani appeared moments later, her bright scrubs a welcome splash of color in the sterile room. "You need something for pain, Dr. Blackwell?" she asked, checking my monitors. "Imani," I whispered, "I need you to do something for me. Something important." She leaned closer, her brow furrowing at the urgency in my voice. "My recorder, under the pillow. Please, put it somewhere safe. Don't let anyone know you have it." Confusion crossed her face, but she'd worked with me long enough at the hospital before my retirement to trust my judgment. Without asking questions, she slipped the small device into her pocket. "And Imani, when did Dr. Patterson say he'd be doing rounds today?" "Around 11, I believe. He had an emergency valve replacement this morning." Just as I thought, another lie from Wesley. "Thank you," I said, letting my eyes close for real this time. The exertion of maintaining alertness through the sedatives had exhausted me. "And Imani, could you call Terrence, Dr. Washington? Tell him I need to see him. Only him." Terrence Washington had been my closest colleague for 30 years. If anyone would help me unravel what was happening without raising alarms, it would be him. "Of course, Dr. Blackwell." Imani patted my hand gently. "Try to rest now." As darkness pulled me under, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. My own son had tried to steal everything I'd built while I lay vulnerable in a hospital bed, and he didn't know that I had recorded every word. When I awoke hours later, the room was dimmer, and a familiar figure sat in the visitor's chair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a medical journal. "Terrence," I said, my voice stronger than before. Dr. Washington looked up, his dark face creasing into a concerned smile. "Connie, how are you feeling?" "Like I've been betrayed by my own blood," I replied, struggling to sit up. His eyebrows rose, but he helped adjust my bed before pouring a small cup of water. Imani seemed concerned when she called. "What's happening?" I took a sip, the cool liquid clearing some of the fog from my mind. "Ethan and Wesley were here this morning. They had me sign papers while I was heavily sedated, not hospital paperwork, documents transferring my practice and accounts to them." Terrence's expression darkened. He'd known Ethan since he was a boy, had watched him grow up, had even written his college recommendation letters. "Are you certain? That's a serious accusation, Connie." "I recorded everything," I said. "Imani has the device." He sat back, processing this information. "What do you need me to do?" "First, I need to know exactly what I signed. They'll file the paperwork quickly, I'm sure of it. Second, I need legal counsel, someone not connected to the hospital or my practice. And third," I paused, the weight of what I was about to say settling heavily on my chest, "I need to know if Meredith is involved." Terrence nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls." "Raymond Ortiz, you remember him? The detective whose mitral valve you repaired 5 years ago? He works in financial crimes now. He owes you his life, Connie. He'll be discreet." "Thank you," I whispered, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years. I never thought it would come to this, my own son. "Family can be our greatest strength or our deepest wound," Terrence said quietly. "But you've never backed down from a fight your entire life, Connie. Don't start now." He was right. I'd fought my way through medical school when women were barely tolerated in the program. I'd built my practice from nothing after being passed over for chief of cardiothoracic surgery because the board wasn't ready for a female department head. I'd continued performing surgeries even after Harold's death left me a widow at 67 when everyone expected me to retire. I wouldn't let Ethan's betrayal be the thing that finally broke me. "One more thing," I said, as Terrence rose to leave. "Check on Abigail Chen. She's running my practice during my recovery. If Ethan and Wesley are moving to take control, they'll pressure her next." As the door closed behind Terrence, I gazed out the window at the ancient oak trees that lined the hospital grounds, their Spanish moss swaying gently in the Georgia breeze. I'd delivered Ethan in this very hospital 48 years ago, had held his tiny body against my chest, and promised to protect him always. Now I needed protection from him. The painful irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my career repairing damaged hearts, but it seemed there was nothing I could do to repair my son's moral compass, or to protect my own heart from breaking. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital, earlier than recommended, but at my insistence. Ethan had arranged for a home health nurse, but I declined, claiming I preferred Imani to check on me during her off hours, an arrangement she readily agreed to. I couldn't risk having someone in my home who might report back to my son. My colonial-style house on Forsyth Park felt different as Terrence helped me inside, colder somehow, as if the betrayal had seeped into its very walls. Or perhaps it was just the knowledge that Ethan had planned to take it from me, along with everything else. "Raymond will be here tomorrow morning," Terrence said, setting my small suitcase in the foyer. "He's already started looking into the paperwork that was filed." "And Abigail?" I asked, lowering myself carefully into my favorite armchair, the one Harold had given me on our 30th anniversary. Terrence's expression grew troubled. "She received a memo yesterday informing her that ownership of the practice has changed hands. She's been instructed to prepare all financial and patient records for review by the new management team." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, despite having expected it. "They're moving quickly. They probably think you'll be too weak and medicated to fight back," Terrence said, his voice hard with anger. "They don't know who they're dealing with." I smiled thinly. "No, they don't. Did you bring what I asked for?" He nodded, placing a shopping bag on the coffee table. Inside was a new digital recorder with enhanced audio capabilities, a prepaid cell phone not connected to any of my accounts, and a small personal safe with a combination lock. Raymond suggested the safe. "Keep your evidence and any important documents in it. Don't use your regular phone or computer. They might have access to your accounts." The thought sent a chill through me. How long had they been planning this? How deeply had they already invaded my privacy? "There's something else you should know," Terrence said, hesitating. "I spoke with Meredith yesterday." My breath caught. My daughter and I had grown distant over the years. My demanding career and her resentment of it creating a chasm neither of us knew how to bridge. But she was still my daughter. "And?" She seemed genuinely shocked when I mentioned concerns about your practice changing hands. Either she's an excellent actress, or she's not involved in whatever Ethan and Wesley are doing. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by determination. Good. I'll need to talk to her myself, but not yet. Not until I have proof. As Terrence left, promising to return with Raymond in the morning, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by photographs chronicling my life, graduating medical school, opening my practice, receiving awards, family holidays, Ethan's college graduation, Meredith's wedding. In nearly every picture with my children, I was wearing my surgical scrubs or formal attire from some medical function I'd rushed from to be present for their milestone. Had I failed them somehow? Had my dedication to my patients come at too high a cost to my family? No, nothing justified what Ethan was attempting to do. Nothing. I retrieved the voice recorder Imani had returned to me and pressed play, forcing myself to listen to my son's betrayal once more. His voice filled the room, smooth and reassuring as he lied to my face. Wesley's occasional interjections, more impatient, less concerned with maintaining the pretense of care. "Just routine paperwork for your recovery care, Mom. Initial here and here. Almost done, Mom. Just a few more signatures and you can rest." And then my own voice, weak but questioning. "What exactly am I signing?" The lies continued, building on one another. The rush to complete the deception before medical staff returned. The fabricated message from Meredith. The false claim about Dr. Patterson's rounds. When the recording ended, I sat in silence, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness or defeat, but of righteous anger. In the morning, I would begin fighting back. But tonight, I allowed myself this moment of grief for the son I thought I knew. The son who had died the moment he decided to betray his mother. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, its deep resonance echoing through the empty house. Outside, the streetlights of Savannah cast long shadows across my garden, where spring azaleas were just beginning to bloom. Life continued its relentless forward march, even as my world had fundamentally shifted on its axis. I thought of all the patients I had treated over the decades, their lives hanging in the balance as I worked to repair their damaged hearts. Many had faced betrayals and heartbreaks of their own, sharing their stories with me during preoperative consultations. I had always listened compassionately, but somewhat distantly, focused primarily on the physical heart rather than the emotional one. Now, experiencing this profound betrayal firsthand, I understood more deeply what they had endured. The physical pain of my surgery paled in comparison to this emotional wound. But I had not built my reputation as one of the finest cardiothoracic surgeons in the South by surrendering to difficulty. I had not broken barriers for women in medicine by accepting defeat, and I would not allow Ethan's betrayal to be the final chapter of my story. Tomorrow, the fight would begin. Tonight, I would rest and gather my strength, because unlike my son, I understood something fundamental about the human heart, both the physical organ I had spent my career repairing and the metaphorical center of our emotional lives. Hearts could be broken, but with proper care and time, they could also heal. And sometimes, they emerged stronger at the broken places. The morning sun filtered through the Spanish moss as Detective Raymond Ortiz sat across from me in my sunroom, his notebook open and a small digital recorder placed between us. 5 years had passed since I'd repaired his heart valve, and now he was here to help me gather evidence of how my son had tried to break mine. "I've looked into the paperwork that was filed, Dr. Blackwell," Raymond said, his voice carrying the slight rasp that had developed after his surgery. "It's comprehensive: power of attorney, transfer of property deeds, reassignment of your medical practice ownership, and access to your investment accounts. If these documents hold up in court, they've essentially stripped you of everything." I gripped the armrests of my chair, the carved mahogany smooth beneath my fingers. "And will they hold up?" Raymond exchanged glances with Terrence, who stood by the window. "That depends. Your recording is compelling evidence of coercion, and the signatures don't match your known handwriting. I've already spoken with the district attorney about building a case, but we need more." "More?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. One recording might not be enough to counter my son's inevitable claim that I was confused, experiencing post-operative delirium, or suffering from early dementia. "We need to establish a pattern," Raymond explained. "And we need to understand the full extent of their plan. From what I can see, this was meticulously orchestrated. They waited until you were vulnerable, isolated, and medically compromised. That suggests premeditation." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling around me like a heavy cloak. "So what do we do now?" "We set a trap," Raymond said simply. "They think you're still recovering, possibly unaware of what you signed. They'll need to solidify their control, especially over the practice. Dr. Washington tells me your former colleague, Dr. Chen, is being pressured." "Yes," Terrence interjected. "Abigail called me yesterday. Ethan and Wesley have scheduled a meeting with her tomorrow to discuss transitional leadership of the practice. The practice I had built from nothing over 40 years, the practice that bore my name and my reputation. The thought of Ethan and Wesley sitting in my office, handling patient files and dismantling my legacy piece by piece made my blood pressure rise dangerously. The heart monitor app on my watch beeped in warning. "Careful, Connie," Terrence cautioned, ever the physician. "Remember what Patterson said about keeping your stress levels down." I took a deliberate breath, forcing my heart rate to slow. "I spent my career staying calm in life-or-death situations, Terrence. I can manage my own vital signs." I turned back to Raymond. "What kind of trap did you have in mind?" Raymond's plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would call Ethan, expressing confusion about some financial documents that had arrived at the house, creating an opportunity for him to further incriminate himself. Meanwhile, Abigail would agree to meet with Ethan and Wesley at the practice, where recording devices would be strategically placed in my old office. "We need to establish their intent and awareness," Raymond explained. "Right now, they could claim they were helping a confused elderly mother manage her affairs during a health crisis. We need to prove they knowingly defrauded you." Elderly. The word stung, though I knew it was technically accurate. At 72, I qualified for the legal protections afforded to senior citizens. Protections that might prove crucial in the coming legal battle. Still, I had never thought of myself as elderly. Not when I could still stand for 8-hour surgeries. Not when I could recite complex pharmaceutical interactions from memory. Not when I still swam 30 laps in my pool each morning. At least, before my hands had betrayed me. "What about Meredith?" I asked, thinking of my daughter in Atlanta. "Terrence says she might not be involved." Raymond nodded. "We'll need to approach her carefully. If she's innocent, she could be a powerful ally. If she's complicit—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. "She's not," I said with more certainty than I felt. "Meredith and I have our differences, but she wouldn't do this." "People surprise us," Raymond said gently, "especially when money is involved." The detective left shortly after, taking my original recording as evidence and leaving behind instructions for using the new devices he'd provided. Terrence stayed, his presence a comfort in the large house that suddenly felt full of shadows. "You should eat something," he said, moving toward the kitchen. "You've barely touched food since you got home." "I'm not hungry." "Connie," he said, using the stern tone he reserved for difficult patients, "you're fighting a battle here. Your body needs fuel." He was right, of course. The surgeon in me knew that recovery required proper nutrition. The betrayed mother in me had lost all appetite. But I nodded anyway, following him to the kitchen, where he assembled a simple lunch from the groceries he'd brought. As we ate, I found myself studying his face, the deep lines around his eyes, the silver that now dominated his once black hair. Terrence had been beside me in the operating room for countless procedures, had stood with me at Harold's funeral, had been godfather to both my children. Now, he was the only person I fully trusted. "Why do you think he did it?" I asked suddenly. "Ethan, I mean. We're not destitute. He's a tenured professor. What would drive him to this?" Terrence set down his fork, considering. "People rarely steal out of pure necessity, Connie. They steal because they want more than they have, or because they feel entitled to it, or because they've made mistakes they're desperate to cover up." "What kind of mistakes?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but Raymond will find out. The question is, are you prepared for what we might discover? About Ethan? About Wesley? Possibly even about Meredith?" Was I? The truth might be worse than I imagined, but living with uncertainty would be unbearable. "I spent my career searching for hard truths inside human bodies," I said finally. "Tumors hiding behind healthy tissue, blockages concealed within vital vessels. I never turned away from difficult discoveries then. I won't start now." That afternoon, I made the call to Ethan as Raymond had instructed. My heart pounded as I heard his voice, so normal, so like the son I thought I knew. "Mom, how are you feeling? I was going to stop by later today." I forced warmth into my voice, though my free hand clenched into a fist. "I'm doing better, though still quite tired. Listen, Ethan, some papers came in the mail today from Coastal Atlantic Bank. Something about changes to my accounts? I'm a bit confused." A pause, brief but telling. "Oh, those. Yes, part of the paperwork we went over in the hospital. Nothing to worry about, just the trust arrangements we discussed. Remember?" The lie flowed so smoothly from him. We had never discussed any trust arrangements, at least not in the way he implied. I had repeatedly refused his suggestions about consolidating my assets. "I'm not sure I understand all the legal terminology," I said, injecting a hint of confusion into my voice. "Could you explain it when you come by, and maybe bring copies of what I signed? Everything's a bit foggy from the medication." Another pause, longer this time. "Sure, Mom, though the original documents are with the lawyers now, but I can explain everything when I see you. How about around 6? "Perfect. And Ethan, could you bring some of those almond cookies from the bakery on Bull Street? I've been craving them." "Of course," he said, his voice softening with what sounded like genuine affection. "Anything else you need?" The question nearly broke me. What I needed was for none of this to be happening. What I needed was my son. My real son, not this stranger who could lie so convincingly while stealing from his own mother. No, that's all. See you at 6. After hanging up, I sat motionless for several minutes, the new recorder clutched in my hand. Had I been convincing? Would he suspect? And most troublingly, how would I face him knowing what I now knew without revealing my awareness of his betrayal? I had never been an actress. In the operating room, I was known for my directness, my refusal to sugarcoat difficult diagnoses or minimize serious risks. Now I would need to play a role, the confused, trusting mother, while gathering evidence against my own child. The hours until Ethan's arrival stretched interminably. I used the time to rest, knowing I would need all my strength and to prepare the house. Following Raymond's instructions, I placed recording devices strategically. One beneath the coffee table in the living room, another on the bookshelf disguised among my medical texts, a third in the kitchen where we might end up talking over cookies and tea. At 5:30, I changed into what Ethan would expect. Comfortable but dignified loungewear, appropriate for a recovering patient. I applied a touch of makeup, but not too much. I needed to look somewhat frail, somewhat dependent. The thought of manipulating my appearance to deceive my son filled me with a deep sadness, but I reminded myself that he had already breached the trust between us beyond repair. The doorbell rang precisely at 6. Through the window, I watched Ethan climb the steps to my front porch, a white bakery box in one hand, a bouquet of flowers in the other. He looked every bit the devoted son coming to check on his recovering mother. Only I knew the predator that lurked beneath that caring facade. I opened the door, bracing myself against it slightly as if for support. Ethan, right on time. "Mom," he said warmly, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You look better than I expected. How are you feeling?" "Improving each day," I replied, stepping back to let him enter, though the stairs are still challenging. He followed me to the living room, setting the flowers and bakery box on the coffee table, directly above one of the hidden recorders. "Perfect. Let me put these in water," he offered, picking up the bouquet again. "You sit and rest." I watched him move confidently through my home to the kitchen, returning moments later with the flowers arranged in my crystal vase, a wedding gift from Harold's parents, now used as a prop in Ethan's performance of filial devotion. "So," he said, sitting across from me, "you mentioned some bank documents?" I nodded, reaching for the envelope I'd placed on the side table. It contained actual mail from Coastal Atlantic Bank, a routine statement that had fortunately arrived that morning, giving credibility to my ruse. "This came today," I said, handing it to him. "It mentions changes to signatory rights and something about a trust account. I don't remember setting up any trust." Ethan took the envelope, his expression carefully neutral as he examined its contents. "Ah, yes. This is related to what we discussed, Mom. Remember? After your hand started giving you trouble, we talked about simplifying your financial affairs." Another lie. We had discussed no such thing. "Did we?" I asked, injecting just the right note of uncertainty into my voice. "I thought we only talked about you helping with bill payments temporarily." A flicker of impatience crossed his features before he smoothed it away. "We discussed more than that. You agreed it made sense to consolidate everything into a family trust, with me as the primary trustee. It protects your assets from estate taxes and simplifies management while you recover. And these papers I signed in the hospital, they set up this trust?" "Exactly," he said, relaxing slightly. "Among other things, we also updated your power of attorney and healthcare directives. All standard precautions, especially after a major surgery." I let my gaze drift to the window, as if struggling to recall. "It's strange. I don't remember discussing any of this before my surgery. Was Meredith part of the conversation?" His shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "No, Meredith wasn't involved. You know how busy she is with her law practice. We felt it was better not to burden her with these details. We, not you and I, but he and Wesley." The confirmation of my suspicions brought no satisfaction, only a deepening sense of betrayal. "I see," I said softly. "And my practice? The surgery center? What happens to those?" Ethan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "They're part of the trust now, Mom. It's better this way. You can focus on your recovery without worrying about administrative headaches. Wesley and I met with Dr. Chen yesterday. She understands the situation." "Does she?" I asked, unable to keep a hint of sharpness from my tone. He didn't seem to notice. Of course. She's being very cooperative. The transition will be smooth, I promise. Transition. Such a gentle word for what amounted to theft. And when I'm fully recovered? What then? For the first time, Ethan looked slightly uncomfortable. Well, Mom, let's be realistic. At your age, after this kind of surgery, and with your hands, it's unlikely you'll return to practice. The trust arrangement is permanent. It's what's best for everyone. Everyone, I repeated, my voice hollow. I see. A silence fell between us, heavy with all that remained unsaid. Ethan broke it by opening the bakery box, revealing the almond cookies I had once loved but now couldn't imagine eating. How about some tea with these? He suggested brightly. I'll put the kettle on. While he busied himself in the kitchen, I closed my eyes briefly, gathering my strength for the next phase of this charade. Raymond had instructed me to get as much detail as possible. Names of lawyers, banks, other accomplices. Information that would help build the case. When Ethan returned with the tea tray, I smiled weakly. You're taking such good care of me. I don't know what I'd do without you. The irony of the statement wasn't lost on me, but Ethan merely smiled, clearly pleased with what he interpreted as my acquiescence. That's what family is for, Mom. Family. The word hung in the air between us, its meaning corrupted by his actions. Speaking of family, I said carefully, accepting the teacup he offered. Does Meredith know about these new arrangements? Ethan stirred his tea with precision, not meeting my eyes. We thought it best to wait until everything was settled before discussing it with her. You know how she can be, always questioning, always complicating things. My daughter, the attorney. Of course she would question what they were doing. And the lawyers handling all this? Are they the same ones who managed Harold's estate? No, Ethan replied. We're using a firm Wesley knows through the hospital, Caldwell and Mercer. They specialize in estate planning and asset protection. I made a mental note of the name, knowing Raymond would want to investigate them. And all the paperwork is with them now? I'd like to review it once I'm feeling stronger. A flicker of concern crossed Ethan's face. There's no need to trouble yourself with legal documents during your recovery, Mom. Everything is being handled. Still, I persisted gently, I'd like copies for my records. I've always kept meticulous files. You know that. Of course, he said after a moment's hesitation. I'll have copies made, though it might take a few days to get them from the lawyers. The conversation continued in this vein for another hour, me extracting small pieces of information while maintaining the facade of the confused but trusting mother. Ethan providing just enough detail to seem forthcoming while avoiding anything that might give me true clarity about what he had done. As he prepared to leave, standing in my foyer, adjusting his jacket, I asked the question that had been burning inside me since I discovered his betrayal. Ethan, are you in some kind of trouble? Financial trouble, perhaps? You know you could always come to me if you needed help. It was a calculated risk, giving him an opportunity to confess, to explain, to perhaps salvage some small fragment of our relationship. For a moment, just a moment, something like guilt flashed across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask of the dutiful son. Everything's fine, Mom. Better than fine. I'm just looking out for you, like you've always looked out for me. With those words, so close to what a loving son might actually say, yet so perversely twisted in context, he kissed my cheek and left, promising to return the next day with more almond cookies and perhaps some books to keep me occupied during my recovery. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. The performance had drained me completely. I slid to the floor, my back against the solid mahogany door, and finally allowed myself to weep, for the son I had lost, for the trust that had been shattered, and for the battle I now faced against my own flesh and blood. After several minutes, I gathered myself and retrieved the recording devices, checking that each had functioned properly. They had. The evidence was accumulating, one damning conversation at a time. I was about to call Raymond when my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. Dr. Blackwell, it's Abigail Chen. I need to talk to you, not over the phone. Can I come to your house? Now? The urgency in her voice alarmed me. Of course, Abigail. Is everything all right? No, she said simply. Nothing is all right. And I think you need to know exactly what your son and son-in-law are planning for your practice. I hung up and immediately called Raymond, then Terrence. Whatever Abigail had discovered, I wanted witnesses present when she revealed it. This wasn't just about my personal betrayal anymore. My practice, my patients, my professional legacy, all were at stake. As darkness fell over Savannah, I stood at my living room window, watching for Abigail's car. Feeling for the first time since this ordeal began a spark of something beyond hurt and betrayal. Something that felt dangerously like righteous fury. The kind of fury that had propelled me through decades of fighting for respect in a male-dominated profession. The kind of fury that had sustained me through 36-hour shifts as a resident, through Harold's long illness, through countless barriers and setbacks. Ethan had made a critical mistake. He had assumed that age and illness had weakened me, not just my body, but my resolve. He had forgotten who I was, who I had always been. I am Dr. Constance Blackwell. I have held human hearts in my hands, have stopped them and restarted them at will. I have stared death in the face countless times and refused to blink. And I was not going to let my son take everything I had built without the fight of his life. Abigail Chen arrived at my home 30 minutes later, her normally composed demeanor visibly shaken. Raymond and Terrence were already there, seated in my living room like sentinels guarding against further invasions. When I introduced the detective, Abigail hesitated only briefly before nodding in understanding. She had already guessed that legal action would be necessary. "They're planning to sell the practice," she said without preamble, setting her laptop on my coffee table. "Not just transfer ownership, but dismantle it entirely. I found these documents on the shared drive after they left yesterday." She opened her computer and turned it to face us. On the screen was a proposal from Gulf Coast Medical Enterprises, a corporate healthcare conglomerate known for acquiring private practices, extracting their profitable elements, and discarding the rest. "They're offering $8 million, Abigail continued, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Contingent on the transfer of all patient records, equipment, and the surgical center property. The deal explicitly excludes retaining current staff beyond a 90-day transition period." My stomach clenched as I scanned the document. 40 years of building a practice known for exceptional care, for taking difficult cases other surgeons rejected, for treating patients regardless of their ability to pay, all to be absorbed into a corporate machine notorious for prioritizing profit over patient outcomes. "When would this sale take place?" Raymond asked, taking notes. "The timeline indicates closing within 30 days, Abigail replied, scrolling to another section of the document. "They're moving extremely quickly. Wesley has already scheduled meetings with Gulf Coast executives for next week." Did Ethan or Wesley directly indicate they had my mother's approval for this sale? Raymond's question was precise, focused on establishing evidence. Abigail's expression hardened. Quite the opposite. Wesley specifically said, "Dr. Blackwell won't be involved in these negotiations. Her health prevents her participation, and we have full legal authority to proceed." When I questioned this, suggesting we should at least consult you about major decisions, she looked at me apologetically. "Ethan said your cognitive function had been affected by the surgery and medication. He claimed the family was handling things as you would want." The cruel irony of that statement hung in the air between us. They were using my own medical vulnerability, my heart surgery, as cover for their scheme, while metaphorically ripping my heart out in the process. "There's more," Abigail said, pulling up another document. "They're planning to access your research archives and patent applications. Wesley specifically asked me about the artificial valve prototype you've been developing with Georgia Tech." My breath caught. The valve design, a project I'd been refining for nearly a decade, potentially revolutionary for certain types of cardiac patients, was still in the patent application phase. If successfully developed and approved, it could help thousands of patients with specific congenital heart defects. I had been planning to license it at minimal cost to ensure accessibility. In corporate hands, it would become another overpriced medical device, out of reach for many who needed it most. "The research data is stored on the practice servers?" Raymond asked. "Most of it, yes, and they've already restricted my administrative access to certain directories. I had to use Dr. Washington's credentials to retrieve these documents." Raymond turned to me. This expands the scope of the case significantly. We're now looking at intellectual property theft on top of elder financial abuse and fraud. The term elder abuse stung, despite its legal accuracy. I had never considered myself elderly, never thought I would be vulnerable to such exploitation. Yet here I was, precisely the type of victim I had warned my older patients about countless times. Do we have enough to stop them? I asked, forcing myself to focus on practical next steps rather than the pain of betrayal. Raymond exchanged glances with Terrence. With the recording from the hospital, your conversation with Ethan yesterday, and now these documents showing their intent. Yes, I believe we can move for an emergency injunction to freeze the assets and halt any pending transactions. How soon? My voice was steady, surgical in its precision. I'll contact Judge Matthews tonight. She handles emergency financial restraining orders. Given the circumstances and evidence, we might have the injunction by morning. And my son, Wesley? I asked, the question hanging between us, the unspoken question of what would happen to them legally. Raymond's expression was professionally neutral, but his eyes held compassion. That depends on how you want to proceed, Dr. Blackwell. We have evidence for criminal charges, multiple felonies, in fact. But pursuing criminal prosecution means a public trial, potential prison sentences. The room fell silent as the full weight of the decision settled around me. Criminal charges against my own son. My brilliant boy who had once followed me on hospital rounds, wide-eyed and curious about human anatomy. My Ethan, who had given a moving eulogy at his father's funeral, speaking of integrity and compassion as Harold's greatest legacies. I need to think about that aspect, I said finally. But the injunction, yes, move forward immediately. And I want to speak with Meredith before she hears about this from someone else. I can make that call now, Terrence offered. I shook my head. No. This is something I need to do myself. After Raymond and Abigail left, the detective with copies of all documents and recordings, Abigail with instructions to act normally at the practice until the injunction was served, Terrence insisted on staying. He made no pretense about his concern, setting up temporary residence in my guest room despite my protests that I wasn't an invalid. It's not about your physical health, Connie, he said, as he brought me a cup of tea, prepared exactly as I preferred it after decades of friendship. No one should be alone after discovering something like this. He was right, of course. The house felt simultaneously too empty and too full, empty of the trustworthy family I thought I had, full of memories now tainted by betrayal. I sat in Harold's study, surrounded by his legal books. He had been a constitutional law professor at Emory before retiring, and stared at my phone. It was nearly 11. But I knew Meredith would still be awake. My daughter had inherited my tendency toward late nights and early mornings, needing less sleep than most. When she answered, her voice carried the distracted tone of someone interrupted while working. "Mom, is everything okay? It's late for you to call." "I'm afraid not, Meredith," I replied, keeping my voice steady through decades of practice delivering difficult news. "There's a situation with Ethan and Wesley that you need to know about." "What kind of situation?" Her attention was fully engaged now, lawyer's instincts activated. They had me sign documents while I was heavily sedated after my surgery, documents transferring ownership of my practice, my home, my investments. They're planning to sell my practice to Gulf Coast Medical within 30 days. A sharp intake of breath, then silence for several seconds. "Are you certain about this?" That would be criminal fraud, elder abuse, possibly medical malpractice if Wesley used his position at the hospital. "I'm certain. I have recordings, documents, witnesses. Detective Ortiz is seeking an emergency injunction tonight." "Raymond Ortiz? Your former patient?" "Yes." Another pause. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Is there any possibility that you agreed to this before your surgery and don't remember? Any discussions about estate planning or succession for your practice that might have been misinterpreted?" The question should have angered me, but it didn't. It was precisely what a good attorney would ask, probing for alternative explanations before proceeding. "No, Meredith. I repeatedly refused Ethan's suggestions about protecting my assets in a family trust. I was planning to retire, yes, but on my own terms. My succession plan for the practice involved a gradual transition to Abigail Chen over 3 years, with provisions for long-term employees and continued charitable care programs. I would never have agreed to sell to Gulf Coast or any similar entity. And the recordings, what exactly do they show? Ethan and Wesley explicitly telling me I was signing routine hospital paperwork while I was under heavy sedation. Later, Ethan claiming to me that we had discussed and agreed to these arrangements before my surgery, which never happened. She exhaled slowly. Jesus, Mom, I had no idea. Wesley mentioned something about helping you with paperwork when I spoke to him last week, but I assumed it was routine post-surgery administrative stuff. Nothing like this. Then you weren't involved? I had to ask, needed to hear it directly. God, no. Her voice cracked with emotion. How could you even think that? He's my brother, and Wesley's my husband's best friend from college, but I would never participate in something like this. Never. The relief was so intense I had to close my eyes for a moment. I'm sorry for asking, but I had to know. No, I understand. You had to be sure. A pause. Then, I'm coming to Savannah. First flight tomorrow. This is family business, and you shouldn't be handling it alone. Terrence is here, I said, and Raymond is taking care of the legal aspects. With all due respect to both of them, you need family right now. Real family, not whatever Ethan and Wesley have become. I'll call you when I have my flight details. After we hung up, I sat motionless in Harold's leather chair, absorbing the reality that my daughter was rushing to my defense. Our relationship had been strained for years, my dedication to my career coming at the cost of missed dance recitals, parent-teacher conferences, and later, law school graduation. The distance between us had grown after she moved to Atlanta, widening further after Harold's death removed the bridge that had often connected us. Now, crisis was bringing us together again. It wasn't how I would have chosen to repair our relationship, but perhaps something positive could emerge from this betrayal after all. I must have dozed off in the chair, because the next thing I knew, Terrence was gently shaking my shoulder. Daylight streamed through the study windows, and he held a mug of coffee in his outstretched hand. Raymond called, he said, as I accepted the coffee gratefully. Judge Matthews signed the emergency injunction at 6 this morning. The sheriff's department is serving papers to Ethan, Wesley, the banks, and your practice as we speak. Everything is frozen. No transfers, no sales, no access to accounts. The swift action should have brought relief, but instead, a different emotion surfaced. Grief. Legal machinery was now in motion against my own son. No matter how justified, it felt like a profound failure. He also said to let you know that the district attorney wants to meet with you tomorrow to discuss whether to pursue criminal charges. I nodded, unable to articulate my tangled feelings about that particular decision. Meredith called too, Terrence continued. Her flight lands at 11. I offered to pick her up, but she's renting a car. The morning passed in a blur of phone calls and arrangements. Raymond provided updates as the injunction was served. Ethan was shocked but not surprised. Wesley was belligerent and threatening legal countermeasures. The banks were cooperating fully. Abigail reported that Gulf Coast medical representatives had arrived for a previously scheduled tour of the practice facilities, only to be turned away when informed of the legal situation. By noon, the full extent of what had nearly happened was becoming clear. Had they succeeded, I would have lost everything: my home, my practice, my research, my financial security. I would have been left dependent on the very people who had betrayed me, possibly shunted off to a retirement facility while they enjoyed the fruits of my life's work. The doorbell rang at 12:30. Terrence opened it to reveal Meredith standing on the porch, looking both determined and exhausted. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her tailored suit slightly rumpled from travel. She had Harold's height and my eyes, a combination that had always made her a commanding presence in any room. "Mom," she said simply, crossing the foyer to embrace me with uncharacteristic emotion. "I'm so sorry." For a moment, I allowed myself to lean into her strength, to be the mother receiving comfort rather than the surgeon always providing it. Then I straightened, gesturing toward the living room where Terrence had tactfully retreated to give us privacy. "Have you spoken with Ethan?" I asked, as we sat facing each other on opposite ends of the sofa, the same sofa where he had lied to my face just days ago. Meredith's expression hardened. "I tried calling him after we spoke last night. He didn't answer. I left a message saying I knew what was happening and was coming to Savannah. He texted back one word: misunderstanding. as if stealing your entire life could be waved away as a simple miscommunication. Her anger was palpable, vibrating in the air between us. In that moment, she was so clearly my daughter. The same righteous indignation I had felt throughout my career when confronted with injustice or incompetence. "He'll try to contact you," I said. "Both of them will, now that the injunction has been served. They'll want to know how much you know, how much I know." "Let them try," she replied, her voice cold. "I've already blocked their numbers. Any communication can go through my firm's attorneys." I raised an eyebrow. "You've involved your firm?" A grim smile crossed her face. "Mom, I'm a partner in one of Atlanta's top litigation practices. When family members commit elder financial abuse and fraud against another family member, that's exactly the kind of situation where specialized legal representation is essential. I've brought in our elder law team. They're preparing documents now to completely revoke the fraudulent transfers and powers of attorney." For the first time in days, I felt something like hope. My daughter, the razor-sharp attorney I had always known she could be, was now directing her considerable talents toward protecting me, the mother who had too often put career before family, who had missed too many important moments in her childhood. "Thank you, Meredith," I said simply. She nodded, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "It's what family does, Mom. Real family." The afternoon brought a cascade of developments. Raymond returned with official copies of the injunction and news that the district attorney was building a strong case. Abigail called to report that staff at the practice were confused but supportive after learning that I had not willingly transferred ownership. My personal banker arrived with documentation of the attempted account transfers and assurances that security measures had been enhanced. Through it all, Meredith remained by my side, asking incisive questions, taking detailed notes, occasionally stepping outside to make calls to her legal team. She had transformed from my somewhat distant daughter into a fierce advocate, bringing order to chaos with each passing hour. As evening approached, Terrence insisted on making dinner for all of us. While he worked in the kitchen, Meredith and I sat in the garden, watching the Spanish moss sway in the gentle breeze. A pair of cardinals flitted between the azalea bushes, their bright red plumage catching the late afternoon light. "You should know," Meredith said after a comfortable silence, "that Wesley and I have been having problems for some time. This situation, it's clarifying certain things for me." I turned to look at her, surprised by the personal revelation. My daughter had always kept her private life exactly that, private. "What kind of problems?" I asked carefully. She gazed out at the garden, not meeting my eyes. "The kind that suggest this scheme with Ethan might not be his first ethical lapse. Financial discrepancies I couldn't explain. Late nights with no clear accounting of his whereabouts. Changes to our investment portfolio without my knowledge or consent." My heart sank. Wesley's betrayal extended beyond me to his own wife. "I'm sorry, Meredith. Truly." She shook her head slightly. "Don't be. Like I said, this situation is clarifying. For both of us, I think." Before I could respond, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. With everything happening, I considered ignoring it, but years of being on call had trained me to answer every call. "Dr. Blackwell speaking." "Dr. Blackwell, this is James Kurtzman, CEO of Gulf Coast Medical Enterprises. I understand there's been some confusion regarding the acquisition of your practice." I put the phone on speaker so Meredith could hear. "There's no confusion, Mr. Kurtzman. My son and son-in-law attempted to fraudulently sell my practice without my knowledge or consent. The courts have issued an injunction preventing any such transaction." A pause, then. "I see. That's concerning. We were led to believe you were fully aware of and had authorized the sale." "They lied to you," I said bluntly. "Just as they lied to me, to the banks, to my staff, and to multiple legal entities. In that case, Dr. Blackwell, Gulf Coast Medical will of course withdraw completely from these negotiations. We have no interest in being associated with fraudulent transactions. However, if at some future point you genuinely wish to discuss potential partnerships or acquisition options, we would be open to direct discussions with you personally." "That won't be necessary," I replied. "My practice is not for sale, not now, not in the future." After ending the call, I looked at Meredith, who was already typing notes on her phone. "Another piece of evidence," she said. Kurtzman's statement confirms they were negotiating based on fraudulent representations. That strengthens the case significantly. The case against my son. The reality of it all hit me again with fresh pain. "Mom?" Meredith's voice softened as she noticed my expression. "Are you okay?" "I keep thinking about where I went wrong," I admitted, voicing the thought that had haunted me since discovering Ethan's betrayal. What I did or didn't do that led him to this point, willing to steal from his own mother, to dismantle everything I built. Meredith was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "You didn't go wrong, Mom. Ethan made his choices. Adult choices with consequences. But as his mother, you gave him every advantage, every opportunity. You showed him what it meant to work hard, to help others, to persevere through difficulty. If he chose to reject those values, that's on him, not you." Her certainty was both a comfort and a challenge to my self-doubt. This was a side of my daughter I rarely saw, the compassionate counselor beneath the tough attorney exterior. "When did you get so wise?" I asked, attempting a smile. "I had good examples," she replied simply, "even when they were busy saving other people's lives." The acknowledgement that she had seen value in my work despite its cost to our relationship brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Before I could respond, Terrence called us in for dinner. As we gathered around my dining room table, the three of us forming an impromptu family of choice rather than blood, I found myself contemplating the heart in ways beyond my surgical training. The physical heart I had spent my career repairing was miraculous enough, resilient, adaptable, capable of healing from tremendous damage. But the metaphorical heart, the emotional center of a human life, was even more remarkable in its capacity to withstand betrayal and still find the strength to trust, to love, to fight for what matters. My son had broken my heart in ways no physical ailment could match. Yet here I sat, surrounded by loyalty and support, preparing to face whatever came next. Somehow, against all odds, I was still whole. Still Dr. Constance Blackwell, still standing. Tomorrow would bring difficult decisions about criminal charges, about the future of my practice, about what relationship, if any, might be salvaged with Ethan. But tonight, in this moment, I allowed myself to simply be present with the people who had proven themselves true family, by choice rather than by blood. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since awakening in that hospital bed with the recorder hidden beneath my pillow, I felt genuinely certain that I would navigate it successfully. Not despite my age and recent surgery, but because of the strength and wisdom those years had given me. The very things Ethan had seen as vulnerabilities to exploit were, in fact, the source of the resilience that would ultimately defeat him. 6 months after my heart valve surgery, I stood at the podium in the newly renamed Blackwell Center for Cardiovascular Excellence, addressing the staff and supporters who had gathered for the official reopening. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating faces both familiar and new as I prepared to speak about resilience, healing, and second chances. The legal battle with Ethan and Wesley had ended not with a dramatic courtroom confrontation, but with a negotiated settlement that Meredith had masterfully orchestrated. Criminal charges were suspended in exchange for full restitution, signed confessions, and their permanent removal from any connection to my medical practice or financial affairs. Wesley had resigned from his hospital position and relocated to Chicago. Ethan had taken a sabbatical from his university teaching position, his future still uncertain. I had chosen mercy over vengeance, not for their sake, but for my own. The district attorney had been disappointed, having built what he called an airtight case of elder financial abuse, but respected my decision. Some wounds, I knew, could not be healed in a courtroom. Today marks not just a new chapter for this medical center, I said to the assembled crowd, but a recommitment to the principles that have always guided our work: excellence in care, compassion for every patient, and innovation that serves humanity rather than profit. My hands still trembled slightly as I held my notes. The nerve damage was permanent, but my voice was strong and clear. In the front row, Meredith sat beside Terrence, both beaming with pride. Beside them was Abigail Chen, now my full partner in the practice and its future leader. Nurse Imani and Detective Raymond occupied seats near the back. their presence a reminder of how crucial small acts of trust can be in moments of crisis. The reorganization of my practice had been complex, but ultimately successful. The partnership with Abigail ensured continuity of care for patients and job security for staff. My valve design patent had been licensed to a nonprofit medical device manufacturer with strict pricing controls to maintain accessibility. A charitable foundation had been established to provide cardiac care for underserved communities in Georgia. Most surprisingly, my relationship with Meredith had been transformed. She had extended her temporary stay in Savannah indefinitely, establishing a satellite office for her firm and purchasing a historic home just 3 blocks from mine. Our Sunday brunches had become a cherished ritual, a time to reconnect without the shadow of past regrets. As many of you know, I continued, this past year brought challenges I never expected to face. A health crisis followed by a profound personal betrayal left me questioning much about my life and legacy. I paused, surveying the supportive faces before me. These people had stood by me, had helped me reclaim what was nearly stolen. But that experience taught me something essential about both cardiac health and personal resilience. Hearts can be broken, literally and figuratively, yet still heal. Sometimes they heal stronger at the broken places. After the ceremony, as guests mingled over refreshments, I found myself standing before the wall displaying my medical credentials and awards, now joined by a framed copy of the artificial valve patent, a reminder of what had nearly been lost, now permanently preserved. Meredith approached, champagne flute in hand. "Congratulations, Mom. You did it." "We did it," I corrected her, accepting the glass she offered. "I couldn't have fought this battle alone." She smiled, the expression softening her normally serious features. "You know, growing up, I always resented how much of yourself you gave to your patients. I thought it meant you had less to give to us, to me and Ethan." I waited, knowing there was more she needed to say. "But watching you these past months, fighting for your practice, for your patients' well-being, for the research that could help thousands, I finally understand. That dedication wasn't separate from who you were as a mother. It was fundamental to who you are as a person." Her words washed over me like a benediction, healing a wound I had carried far longer than my recent surgical scar. "Have you heard from him?" she asked quietly, both of us knowing she meant Ethan. "A letter last week," I admitted, "asking to meet when he returns to Savannah next month. Will you see him?" I gazed out the window at the oak trees lining the medical center's entrance, their branches etched against the clear blue Georgia sky. Yes, not because I've forgotten or because I fully trust him again, but because holding on to anger serves no purpose, and because everyone deserves the chance to try to make amends, however incomplete those amends might be. Meredith nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's why you're Dr. Constance Blackwell. Some of us mere mortals might not be so forgiving." Later that evening, alone in my study, I reviewed the speech notes I had prepared, but ultimately set aside, preferring to speak from the heart rather than from carefully crafted text. One passage caught my eye. At 72, I found myself fighting a battle I never anticipated. Not against disease or death, which I've confronted throughout my career, but against betrayal by those I trusted most. That experience taught me that age is not a vulnerability, but a source of strength. The wisdom gained through decades of life equipped me to recognize deception, to rally allies, and to fight with a resilience born of past struggles overcome. I set the pages aside and turned instead to my journal, where I had begun recording reflections on this unexpected chapter of my life. Perhaps someday these words might help another woman facing similar challenges. Perhaps my story might remind someone that it's never too late to fight for what you've built, for what you believe in, for what is rightfully yours. The recording that saved everything still sat in my safe, a small device that had captured a betrayal but also sparked a reclamation. I had stopped listening to it months ago, no longer needing the reminder of that painful moment. The future, not the past, now commanded my attention. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, and I would face them as I always had, with steady hands despite their tremor, with clear vision despite advancing age, and with an unwavering commitment to healing broken hearts, including my own. If you've been through a similar experience with family betrayal, Know that you're not alone. I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss my next video where I'll share how I rebuilt my relationship with my daughter after years of distance.